everyone, I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life and No Bullshit Bodybuilding, and I am really excited to be here tonight with Bret Contreras. And as he pointed out to me, he would be here naturally, so you should be thanking me for being here, in other words.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely, it's an honor. So what we're going to do tonight is a Q&A. I posted about this, I think, yesterday on Facebook, and we received a number of good questions, and we'll just go down the line. No cookie cutter questions, so I will not ask you about hip thrusts except for in the context of the controversy.
Good.
Thoughts on my beliefs, such as high frequency training, mental health, IFYM, or out of the box topics like leg training for males or versus females, programming for different goals, etc. So what do you think about high frequency training? This is something that's been brought to the forefront, I think, particularly this year.
So there's a published, it was a survey that was published in JSCR by Hackett a few years back,
Right.
that looked at the training methods of, I think it was natural and juiced bodybuilders, and every single one of them followed a body part split.
Right.
And they trained, most of them trained their muscles once a week, some of them twice a week. So I have my beliefs, but you always have to, you always want to question everything. You always want to be open-minded but skeptical. You don't want to be dogmatic and black and white thinking. And so whenever I form a belief, I try to think of the other side,
Right.
you know? And am I prepared to say, hey, every jacked bodybuilder in the world, you're all doing it wrong? No, I'm not.
Sure.
So there's something to that way of training, body part split training, that makes it work. Now, what does every bodybuilder do when they're trying to bring up a weak body part?
Well, you're going to say they increase training frequency, although interestingly, I've seen people online say that, no, that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is increasing intensity.
Well, what do the bodybuilders do? Well, I should say this. I read bodybuilding mags from like age 15 till like 30, and then I stopped. So I haven't read them in the last 10 years, but
Right.
during that 15-year span, every bodybuilder would train high frequency with the lagging parts. So if they had arms they wanted to bring up, they'd train arms every other session or something, like 3 times a week. And there's a cool new article in Sports Med by Jeremy Lenecke's group. I think it's Scott Denkel is the lead researcher. And they came out with a hypothesis paper talking about how they think that based on data on acute muscle protein synthesis, they think a lot of the sets are wasted with high volume training. Like say you can only, you max out at 6 sets with protein synthesis and you get no more if you do 15 sets. But those extra sets, not only are they wasted that you don't get additional protein synthesis, but you also get more damage, so it takes you longer to recover from. And so they think that, they hypothesize that everyone would see better results if they trained with less total volume and more frequency. And in my experience, so let me tell you my experience, I'm known for shaping women's glutes, and I gravitated upon this. I mean, if someone had a gun to your head and said, well, I guess they wouldn't have a gun to your head for like 2 straight months, but
right. Maybe
if
they're just really determined.
yeah, maybe they, you have like a little red dot on your head, like laser scope on you, but maybe like if you said, we kidnapped your family and you can have them back if you put 2 inches on your glutes in the next 2 months. Are you going to train glutes once a week? No, you'd be training glutes probably 5 times a week or something.
Right.
So in my experience, I've seen better results but that's a whole other topic involving like exercise selection and volume and how you organize the workouts, the types of exercise. But yes, my girls will train glutes 3 to 6 days a week, and but we do a lot of band work, a lot of high metabolic stress that it's not highly damaging.
Right.
And for that reason, we're able to get away with it. But my girls will do 35 sets of glute training a week, and it's all manageable because of how we manage effort and load and the exercise types and the different types of glute exercises. Sounds like a lot, but it's very doable the way we go about it. But I'm a big fan of high frequency training. I myself, right now, I'm doing lower body 3 times a week and upper body 3 times a week. So I'm training Monday through Saturday. But in order to do that, I have to do low volume per session. I can't do 15 sets for quads and then 2 days later do it again. I can do 4 sets for quads or something, and you know, I don't break it down into body, like muscle groups, so I break it more into movement patterns, but
Right.
still I can do the squat pattern 3 times a week. I just can't do so many sets of it.
Mm-hmm. I know there was another question in that thread about your training personally, and oftentimes you'll even do just 1 set per exercise. Now, do you think that's entailed by high frequency training, or is that what you are able to do given high frequency training?
Yeah, so I've talked to like Brad Schoenfeld and James Krieger about this, because they've done meta-analyses on volume and frequency and everything like that. And yes, you know, obviously like 4 sets gets you better results than 1 set, but the first set probably gets you like 80% of the results.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you do 1 set every day? You know, no one ever thinks about this. It's like, here's why talking about muscle physiology is hard. When you have I have a hard time keeping plants alive, and there's like 3 variables. There's the sunlight, there's the soil, and there's water, and I still can't keep them alive. And with humans, you've got a million, not only with program design, but sleep and stress and food and supplements and everything else. So, but people generally, most of what we do is based on tradition and history and not people thinking outside the box. Well, probably 80% of your gains come from that first set. Well, let's say you were trying to maximize your back, your total back musculature. Think of all the different back, I mean, there's deadlifts, and then there's all the rowing pattern, the pull down and chin up patterns.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different prone trap raises, shrugs, rear delt raises, the things that fill up. I'm talking about your whole back, obviously, people, because I know those are different body parts, but think of your whole back. You could do, you know, back extensions with actually spinal extension. You could, all the little muscles in there. If I said, Ian, you can do 10 sets of back a week, how would you say, I'm going to do all 10 sets of deadlifts, I'm just going to strong as hell deadlift? Or would you say, I can do 10 sets a week for back, I'm going to do 1 or 2 sets of deadlifts, I'm going to do a set of lumbar extensions, I'm going to do a set or 2 of chin-ups or pull-downs, a couple rows, and then I'm going to do some rear delt raises and shrugs or something, like face pulls, whatever. So I tend to think like that. If you can throw in, I remember a guy, Ian King, years back, wrote for Teenage, and he said for back especially, he believes in doing less sets per exercise, but more total exercises because of all the different angles. Well, I think that way for every muscle group.
Mm-hmm.
You know, glutes, shoulders, pecs, you want to hit all the fibers. So yeah, I do 1 set, but I'll do like upper body, I'll do say 6 to 8 sets of upper body, but I do it Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I do the same thing for lower body, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's just what I'm doing lately.
Right.
And it's working well. But so many people can't do that type of volume because they could not get to they couldn't just do 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 sets.
Mm-hmm.
They have to get into the zone and they have to do so many sets.
Right. So 2 questions. One is to the 80% number. That's higher than I would have put it. The one paper I can think of is the knee extension paper, 2012. I don't recall. The lead author was McClellan or something similar to that, where they had 3 groups. One group just did 1 set to failure, and then 2 different groups did 3 sets to failure with different loads. And they showed that, and it was an 8-week study looking at hypertrophy, and it was about
that was
double.
Mitchell was
Okay.
Steve Phillips' group.
So obviously Mitchell sounds just like McKellen, but it was about double the hypertrophy, if I recall correctly, in the 3-set group.
Yeah,
But-
they did 1 set and then 2 different 3 sets.
Right.
Well, okay,
So 80%.
well, Brad and James just did a meta-analysis this last year,
Mhm.
and they looked at like weekly volume of like
Right.
5 sets or less, and 10 sets or less, or 10 sets or more. I can't remember exactly how they split it up. But there's also I've looked at so many of the individual studies. So yeah, they do a meta-analysis and combine for statistical power. But when you look at the individual studies, there's a lot of studies showing 1 set versus 3 sets, and there's no difference in growth. Now, that's why it's important to do the meta-analysis. And I'm not saying so here's the flaw with that type of thinking. Yeah, they're saying 1 set versus 3 sets per week. What about when you do 3 sets, you know, twice a week versus 1 set 5 times a week or something like that? You know, it's like, what's the best way to split it up? You know, exercise selection, frequency, volume, load, effort, you know, all these different variables. I think there's also a genetic component to it, and there's some research on the ACE2 allele or whatever, the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, whatever gene, that with, at least with strength, wasn't with hypertrophy, with strength, if you have the ACE double D allele, you see better results with lower body training just doing 1 set. You see better results than doing 3 sets. And I can think.
So how does one accommodate for that in the real world? Like, how does one figure that out?
Because you're never going to get your. Well, it's just like when I EMG people. I EMG my clients in a comprehensive. So if I did this comprehensive panel on you, and I'd go, hey, Ian, you actually your best upper pec exercise is actually the low pulley cable crossover. You get more upper pec activity than when you do barbell incline, or you actually get more upper pec when you do close grip barbell incline than wide grip or whatever. I can give you a detailed analysis, but you're never going to get that. So we read studies and they report the averages, but when you're an actual researcher and you find these studies, you have this guy, like I remember when Bret and I looked at grip on the reverse pec deck,
right.
We published a study and we found neutral grip was superior, but 2 of the guys in the study saw better when they did this. So when they did pronated. Now, so the research reports averages, you may be different. So
how does that make you feel about making general recommendations? Do you feel like, man, I'm not sure I can even make a general recommendation?
Well, you go by the stats and you recommend what's best for the masses, but then you offer that caveat that you may be different. Like my client Sammy, she's my prized bull. She's my best client, like favorite. She's so freaking strong. Mm-hmm. She's like 123 pounds and, pulled 315, squatted 235, hip, my first client to hip thrust 315 for 10, I think she got at one point, and had such a good physique, and she was just so physically strong and dense. Like her glutes were the hardest glutes I've ever felt. They weren't the biggest, but they were the most solid. Now, I could not train her the way I trained the rest of the group. I trained like 6 bikini girls at one time, called them the glute squad, and I'm like, if I pushed her hard, the next session she would be like at 50% strength. She'd be wrecked. And I only trained her twice a week. So over time I realized I gotta pull back. And finally she's just doing 1 hard set. And I've trained a few people like this throughout my career where they do better doing one. Well, my options are either do 1 hard set or do like 3 sets, but very submaximal. Like cut her off at 10 reps when she could do 20 reps. But then they're mad at you because you cut them. Submaximal effort takes a while to get used to. You feel like you're leaving a lot in the tank. But yeah, I had to do low free. I couldn't do, if I had to train her 5 days a week, that would have been tough. So I think there's a genetic component to it, and I think people don't experiment enough to find out what works best for them. Most people stick to a similar program their whole lives, and they never really tinker with the variables enough to say, this is what works for me.
So for those people watching this, would your recommendation literally be as simple as try different things, see how it goes? So,
well, Ian, just in my training, now I'm doing what I just described, but for the previous 2 months I did DUP. I hit squats, deadlifts, and bench press 3 times a week, hard as hell. Now deadlifts I couldn't do full all out all 3 days. But I had a stiff leg day, a conventional day, and a sumo day. I went heavy on the sumo, like hard on the sumo day. The other 2 days I went sub-maximal. But I hit bench hard as hell 3 days a week, and same with squats. What I found was I couldn't handle the squat. My quads were so crippled the whole month. But after this, I think I did it 6 weeks, and at the end, I set a bench PR and a deadlift PR. And my squat, I think, what I realized is I can't handle the volume for squats because my quads take a beating, so I could do reduced volume. But you learn, that's the way you learn. I did HIIT training, 1 set to failure, and I thrived off that. And it could have just been, when I was 16, I started really doing like body part split, high volume.
Right.
I did that till I was 24, and that's when I tried HIIT training. It could have just been the novelty factor, but I think I did it for like 10 months, and I grew like a weed, and my strength went through the roof. Then I switched back. But yeah, I've tried everything. I've experimented so more with than other. I've tried every program, and you absorb what's useful and you disregard what isn't. It's the same with most of my discoveries and like happened when I was injured. or like had a nagging injury, and I'm like, I need to train around this.
Right.
And people go, I can't train, my shoulder hurts, and I'm like, so your ankles are fine, your knees are fine, your hips are fine, your lumbar spine is fine, your thoracic spine is fine, this shoulder is fine, this elbow is fine, this wrist is fine, this elbow is fine. It's one joint out of like 13 major joints. And you could train this arm, and the crossover effect would retain a lot of your strength in this arm, and you could do lower body, and you could do abs, and you could do single leg work, and you could do core, and you could do all sorts of stuff, but no, they just was weird.
So as an example, my understanding is you had a client who, for context, you were skeptical as to the advantage of higher rep work, but then you had a client who got hurt and was exclusively able to do high rep hip thrusts, and she actually responded very well to this, and this caused you to revise your views about higher rep work. How much of that got lost in translation, given I didn't hear it from you directly?
This could be a few different stories. With the high rep work, I remember, even when I came out with hip thrust back in the day, like 10 years ago, I was all about heavy, you gotta go heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, it was every coach, heavy, high rep doesn't do anything, which I never fully believed, but I didn't think sets of 30 would, you know,
They build endurance.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what
well,
I
they do build endurance, but back then it was like, this is for building, this is for toning, which is so stupid. But anyway, it's hard to think that you could just do sets of 30. But I do remember a bodybuilder named Marcus Rule, and I would look at his program, and he did like 4 sets of 20 on everything.
Mm-hmm.
All machines, like his back workout was like lat pull downs to the front, lat pulls in the back, and seated rows.
Right. And he was one of the biggest guys.
Yeah, back then. But anyway, Bret Schoenfeld and I were both very skeptical of it, and then Stu Phillips kept coming out with more and more studies, and we were skeptical, but you know, open-minded to it, and we did our own study. That helps convince you, because it's like we did this study, and our hypothesis was rejected, and now there's like 12 to 15 studies showing that, you know, you can do heavyweight, medium weight, lightweight, as long as you're pushing it close to failure, you see equal muscle growth. But with my clients, yeah, so in the past 10 years, that's one thing I'm doing differently now. We do really high reps. We run the whole spectrum. And Brad and I still think there's an advantage to running the spectrum. Stu Phillips does not. His latest paper showed no advantage to doing a mixture, but there's a logical basis for maybe the heavyweight is better at hitting the type 2 fibers, maybe the lighter weight better at hitting the type 1 fibers. And so we did a study that showed us, especially an effect size advantage for upper body when you did a varied loading, like combined loading protocols, rather than, instead of doing like 3 sets of 8, do like a set of 5, a set of 10, and a set of 20.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Excellent. Since
I know that person had more questions, but that was like 8 questions in one.
Yes, it's cheating. How can I make my booty pop? In all seriousness, I can pretty much deadlift over 800 pounds on my worst day, but I don't think I've ever felt any lift, presumably deadlifts, anywhere other than in his hamstrings and lower back. Any suggestions for specific modalities for glute strengthening for someone like me?
So is he talking about the deadlift for
Yeah, so
how he can feel?
He deadlifts over 800 pounds, but
he
he
wants
doesn't
to
feel
know
his
how he
glutes.
can feel his glutes more in the deadlift. So it's funny, 2 months ago I told you I did the DOP program, squats, bench, and deadlifts, and I was deadlifting 3 times a week. But the one day was stiff legs. And I've never felt stiff legs in my glutes at all. I feel them in my hamstrings. But I found that if I took like a wider stance than normal, and then I used straps and did a wider grip than normal so I could get more hip flexion and go deeper, and then I kind of like used 315 to 365, so that's like, I've pulled 615, so maybe like 60% of 1RM, and I would just be real, so I was like a stiff leg in terms of like high hips, but I was grip out wider, feet out wider, so wider stance, and I would just really focus on making my glutes pull me up. And I've never felt my glutes so much on a deadlift, but I really focused on that. And once you get to the top, once you get past your knees, focus on pushing the hips forward with a giant glute squeeze. I'm sure, so the way to feel a muscle is to go 50 to 60% of 1RM and really tinker around with different stance widths and placements and positions and tempos and things like that. That's the way you can, I'm sure he could figure out a way.
How significant do you think that is really? Because it's very intuitive. Oh, you feel your pecs burning so much more if you do this. But is there an evidential basis really for saying, yes, that's actually better for hypertrophy or strength?
Good question. That has not really been studied. Well, it's been studied with EMG. And so there's this huge thing in controversy in the strength and conditioning industry right now, where you have the guys, the external attentional focus. It's attentional focus, research. And you can focus externally outside the body or internally on body parts. And there's this researcher, Gabriel Wolf, who thinks that external is always better, no matter what, across the board. You focus externally and it has a better outcome. And then she has a lot of disciples. And Nick Winkelman's one of them. There's a lot of researchers. Now, these people work with mostly athletes, and for athletes, it's almost always better. If you want to jump farther, you don't ever think, okay, contract your quads as hard as you can right before takeoff. That would throw you off and make you do worse. And there's there's probably 100 studies that show when you're doing a performance task, whether it's jump distance, jump height, even like dart throwing, like bow and arrow stuff, things like
if you're thinking about like elbow extension.
Yeah, like you would never throw a dart. You would focus on like the bullseye or something. You think of something externally, never internally. When it's accuracy, precision, force, power, strength. Like if you're gonna max out in a squat, you don't go, all right, I want you to squeeze your glutes as hard as you can on the way up. You would say, I don't know, you'd say something like, picture, exploding up so hard the bar is gonna fly off your back or so. I don't know, that would probably throw you off. But anyway, my contention is that internal attentional focus is better for two main things. Number one, fixing form. And if we only do external attentional focus, you get these lift fail compilations where people are only focusing on the weight and not form, and their form goes to crap. Half of getting people results is keeping them safe so they don't get injured. Mm-hmm. If you just let people do whatever they wanted, that's why personal trainers are valuable. That's why strength coaches are valuable. We see people doing stuff where you go, stop, get your knees out when you squat, like chest up when you deadlift, ribs down when you hip thrust. These things are important so people don't start getting overuse injuries and pain and discomfort. And so for fixing form and for muscle activation. And with the muscle activation research, there's probably, I'd say at least 10 studies that show when you focus internally, you get higher activation. And we did me and my two interns, Joey and Andrew back in the day, collected some pilot data, and it was crazy. You could do a 45-degree back extension, trying to not use your glutes. You could do a back extension using only 3% max glute activation. But then if you try to use your glutes, it would be 35%. So it's you can
and
really
that look visually different?
No, we tried to make it look the same kinematics and the same tempo. Whether it was perfectly precise is probably not, but we tried that was the whole thing. You didn't change your form or your cadence, but I'm sure it did a little bit. But yeah, the point is, now, so here's the crux of the argument. The external attentional focus, people say, well, you can lift more weight when you use an attentional, and lifting more weight is more force. Mm-hmm. So you're gonna have more muscle growth. Maybe you do have more total muscle growth, but my contention is that more force into the ground, or more ground action, more force into the bar doesn't mean more muscle force. Mm-hmm. Muscle force is and you can force share, you can shift the focus, and some of the research shows that if you use even if you pre-exhaust, you end up using more
of the non-exhausted muscles.
Non-exhausted muscle.
So there it is on the record, okay? Pre-exhaustion, no.
Well, pre-exhaustion, yes, if you want to work the other muscle.
Other muscles, yeah.
Not this.
What was it we were talking? It was something like doing.
Pec deck before bench, you use your triceps more, for example.
It was like doing hip thrusts after well, I wish I could remember, but it was a weird scenario of like, well, you don't want to do that because it will fatigue this, but actually if you do that, it will cause the non-fatigued muscle that you're trying to hit to do more of the work proportionally, and maybe that's not actually a bad outcome.
Well, and that's another thing. The research hasn't looked at everything. I know sometimes if I do like, some glute activation, and glute activation is popular in athletes and powerlifters, and they'll say when I do some glute activation, I feel my glutes working more when I squat, when I deadlift. That needs more research on it, by the way. But anyway, my contention is that when you focus internally, the bodybuilders have been saying the mind-muscle connection for so many years.
Right. What
are you going to say again? You're all stupid. You should just lift for as much as you can do. So Brad and I are going to do, and Andrew's going to be on it too. We're going to do a study next year looking at external attentional focus versus internal on hypertrophy, because we know activation is higher.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's like if activation is higher, it's probably going to result in more hypertrophy.
The logical next step, yeah.
But and it might matter the muscle. For example, if you do a leg extension, what other muscles can you hit? It's like if you go for like external focus and trying to explode up versus trying to fill your quads, it's not going to be much different.
Which is really interesting because a lot of people would say it's a knee extension, you're focusing, like really focus on your quads because it's an isolation. But you would
how
say,
can you not?
like what difference could, yeah.
But when it's like a bench press, you could use pecs, front delts, and triceps. When it's a squat, So anyway, that's an interesting topic of conversation.
All right, so Dylan Gargan asks, most practical way of quantifying volume within a given muscle group, for example, glute volume through multiple exercises, and adhering to a steady progression scheme. How often are his workouts planned and perhaps calculated versus going into the gym and going with the flow? Now I just want to note that this is an issue I have with the traditional conception of volume because it cannot be translated from one exercise to another.
So in my seminars I have this slide. Not all volume is created equal. You do 5 sets of 5 deadlifts, you feel like you got hit by a truck the next day. If you did 5 sets of 5 lateral band walks, you wouldn't even feel like you did anything the next day. So those are always my example. Lateral band walks. Think of like the anatomy chart with the muscular system. Think of in red which muscles would be working during a deadlift compared to a lateral band walk. With the deadlift, it's probably like 75% of the muscles in your body highly activated. With the lateral band walk, it's mostly just the glute medius and upper gluteus maximus. Anyway, and also you're only working short muscle length. So in a lateral band walk, you start in neutral, an anatomical position, and you move to the side to a short position. You don't even get into a stretch. So there's no strain, there's not much muscle damage at all. Whereas in a deadlift, the hardest part is getting it off the floor. You'll back roll around slightly. Usually people think they're in neutral spine, but they're really not.
Right.
And it's a lot of stretch tension in the hamstrings, the glutes, if you round in the erectors and things like that. It's a lot of shear force on the spine. It's a lot of compressive force on the spine. The highest compressive forces and shear forces out of any exercise I've seen is with the deadlift. Actually, shear force I think is a football blocking maneuver, but anyway, it beats you up. The deadlift is special because you feel like you got hit by a truck. So yeah, quantifying volume is exercise dependent, and also it might be load dependent. So I hate this. When you publish studies, you have to equate volume, and it's like.
Yes.
So let's take it to absurd. I could have someone do 1 set of 20 or 20 sets of 1.
Right.
If it's just sets times reps.
Well, yeah.
How stupid is that? Obviously 20 sets of 1 would take you, even if you rested 90 seconds in between sets, which is fast. If you rested 2 minutes, it's a 40-minute workout compared to 1 minute. Why can't you equate time? Why can't you not equate volume? Sometimes you can if that's the question you're looking at. But peer reviewers they laser in on that. Well, volume's not equated. Anyway, Brad and I just got a paper published.
3x3 and 3x10?
Yeah. And it showed similar, the lower body muscles, particularly the quads, saw better results. Strength was better for the 3x3 and hypertrophy was better for the 3x10. But Mike Zordos and his colleagues, they have an interesting way of calculating volume. So it's not just sets, it's sets times reps times percent 1RM. And so that kind of has a corrective factor, like heavier sets are weighted more than lighter sets.
Right.
So if it's 95% of 1RM, you're gonna do, and you do, 4 sets of 2, that's 4 times 2 is 8, and then 8 times 95%, 8 times 0.95, so it's like, 7 point something. Whereas if you did, 2 sets of 20 with 60% of 1RM, that'd be 2 times 20 is 40 times 0.6 would be a score of 24. So there's some sort of correction with load, meaning heavier weight is more taxing than lighter weight. But some people do volume load, sets times reps times load. There's just different ways of quantifying it. Now,
But what about in that particular scenario of trying to talk about volume when multiple exercises are involved? Like flat barbell press, flat dumbbell press. What do you do with this?
yeah.
Like what I have done is I really started talking about number of working sets. Like that's something, so I can't even remember the last time I calculated anything. It's just like this workout contained 4 working sets for
Well,
chest.
it becomes even more complicated if you do submaximal loading, like pause reps, dynamic effort reps if you're a power lifter. Well, even for I like doing deadlifts twice a week with one all-out heavy day and one day where you're doing more technique work or like RDLs or stiff-leggeds or something where you don't go all out, where you're not crushing it, like the effort is low. But it's even more complicated because if you do submaximal, you could do 10 sets and it wouldn't, West Side method, they might do 8 sets of 3, but it's with 50% of their 50 to 60% of their 1RM for like 3 reps.
Right.
That doesn't beat you up so much because you could do it for 20 reps, but you're only doing 3 explosively. But anyway, I agree, working sets works pretty well.
Sure.
For generally. And I think the second part of that guy's question is, how do you organize your workouts?
Yes.
Like I said, I'm always changing things up. So I did, 3 months ago I did DUP with squats, bench, and deadlifts. 2 months ago I did DUP with hip thrusts, incline press, and chin-ups. And then the last month I've done like high frequency, lower body 3 days a week, upper body 3 days a week, but one to 3 sets, but usually 1 set of things, and it works well. But I always try different things, but I don't just go and wing it. There's always structure to it. So like tomorrow I'm gonna work out. I don't know exactly what I'll do, but I'll do two or 3 presses, and two pulls, and then a couple of isolation lifts for the upper body,
Right.
And then the next day for lower body, I think I'm going to do squats and deadlifts, probably just work my way up to 1 hard top set. And by the way, when I deadlifted, when I deadlifted 610, that my record is now 615, which just shows you different strategies. When I worked up to 5, when I first did 601, powerlifting meet a few years back, I was doing deadlifts twice a week, a heavy deadlift day and a heavy block pull day. When I hit 610, I was doing 1 set of deadlifts per week on Friday. 1 set I would do, for warm, I'd do it after I squatted. So I'd already be warm. I'd do 405 for 1, then I'd do 495 for 1 for warm-ups, and then I'd do, depending on how 495 felt, I'd either do 585 for a single or 565 for a double or something, or try something. I think I got 545 for 5 at one point. But I'd try for a PR, and when I felt it, I went from 495 right to 610. And then what got me to 615 was doing the DUP approach, where I did deadlifts 3 times a week, but 2 of the days were not too hard. Louis Simmons always said this, everything builds the deadlift. It's the most unique out of all the exercises, but lots of approaches can work. I've found different assistance lifts transfer to the deadlift. different portions of my life. One time I started doing front-loaded reverse lunges, and my deadlift shot up. One time I started doing reverse hypers, and my deadlift shot up. And then the way assistance lifts work, you shoot up it has an immediate effect and then no further effect. Mm-hmm. So you luck out when you find that assistance lift that works. But, so to answer that question, I have structure, I have like checks and balances system, so I don't go in and get carried away and end up doing 30 sets. But it's like a loose structure with a lot of flexibility in there. Yesterday, my shoulders were still a little beat up from Saturday, so I did, I did behind the neck press because it's not as hard on my front delts, and I did more of like bodybuilding type work, and then tomorrow I'll do more heavy powerlifting type work.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for someone who doesn't have 20 plus years of training experience on which they can draw, how do they strike that balance? I mean, is there even a good general recommendation of how, because if one extreme is, I know that in 4 days I am doing incline dumbbell press with a 64.7 pound dumbbell for 7 reps, and then I will go for an 8th rep, but I won't get it, but I know that I'm doing that. And then the other extreme is someone who's goes by feel even
I'm going to go to the gym and wing it.
Yeah, like whatever feels good.
Well, no, I would say do your homework online. Find out what are the best. Dabble in powerlifting methods. Try starting strength. Try 5-3-1. Try Smolov or Shiko or the Russian squat program. Look into bodybuilders. Find out how the bodybuilders train. Do high volume, body part split training for a while. Try HIIT training. Try high frequency full body training. Try lower upper splits. Try push pull splits. Try them all, and then try all these different exercises. Get good at them, because you have a lifelong for lifting for life, right? We're lifelong lifters. How are you going to know what works best if you don't tinker and experiment enough? Most people never even come close to learning what works best for them because they don't think outside the box. They have their blinders on and they don't experiment.
Right. Now, I find it very interesting that everything you just said, I feel you could have said if you had never read a scientific paper. So the question which arises is, where does the science come in? Like, what role does it play really in practice? How much of this is you find it fascinating to read the research, but a lot of that doesn't carry over to the real world versus that which strongly informs what you do?
That's an awesome question. So it's like, for me, my grandpa was an engineer, and he bought me Discover magazine. He got me subscriptions when I was young. I'd read them. Even when my friends came over one day, and on my desk is A Tour of the Calculus. That was a book that he bought me, before I ever took calculus, and I read it. And this book by Richard Feynman and on physics, 6 Easy Principles or something, and then Stephen Hawking, Black Holes Ain't So Black. And I read these books, and I read them and I loved them. I've always been scientific, but you grew up lifting. I grew up reading the muscle mags. And then I found online websites. Back when I started lifting, the web didn't exist. We couldn't type anything in there. It wasn't the internet.
50 years ago.
Yeah, I'm 40 years old, so I started lifting 25 years ago when I was 15. But now you can find so much good stuff online. But you could be an awesome strength coach and personal trainer, having never read a research study. Say you just had a good coach yourself, like a high school strength coach, and then you went and played sports in college. And you just absorbed and you read, and you had blogs and YouTubers that you watched. You could be an awesome trainer. But how are you ever, I'm here to change the way the world trains. I'm here to make the biggest impact. And ironically, I came up with the hip thrust and I thought, this is such a good exercise. I want people to do it. And then I got hit with all of these questions and I couldn't answer them. Mm-hmm. I had a good intuitive understanding.
You couldn't just make up answers. That's the way to go.
Well, I ended up getting my PhD, specializing in biomechanics, and now I look back at the way I used to describe, now I can go, I was describing the hip extension torque angle curve, but I didn't know it was called that.
Right.
I didn't have the vocabulary. But if you want to be, a really influential fitness authority, you need to learn the science. You need to have both. And that's what I like about, you travel to different countries. Nick Gill is the strength coach for the All Blacks rugby team in New Zealand, and they're legendary. Mm-hmm. He's a gym rat. He's in the gym all day long with his athletes. He lifts himself, but he also has his PhD and helps out with the research, and that's how it should be. The U.S. is very cocky. I remember my supervisor, John Cronin, saying, you guys in the U.S., you rely on population. You have 300 million people, you have diversity, you've got, all different races and everything. And so you have the population to be good. We have like 3 million people in New Zealand. We don't have the population, so we rely on science. He's like, you guys are studying, GPS data now. We did that. We're done with it. We got all that 10 years ago.
So this is in the context of, for context, I know very little about sports. So we just have so many people that better athletes will arise naturally because...
I don't think U.S. has the best... maybe we do because of our population, but a lot of other countries take sports science a lot more seriously. Mm-hmm. And here I've seen so many coaches that are like, screw the research and this whole anti-research attitude. You don't see that in other countries. They respect it. It's so refreshing to go to other countries and meet these coaches. And there are plenty here in the U.S., but there are also plenty who don't.
So why would someone be opposed to the research? I know it's kind of a weird question because that's not where you are, but what is it they say?
Look at religion, look at politics, look at all the pseudoscience out there. People are very good at analyzing other people's flaws, just not their own flawed thinking. There's this saying, religion is the opiate of the masses, but I don't think of it as religion. It's like extra, or like extraordinary things are the opiate of the masses. It's like, being scientific saves me a lot of money every year because I don't fall for gimmicks. And so I look at other people and I'm like, you're so gullible, and you just blindly think this. You aren't even going to do any research. First of all, it's laziness. It's hard to become scientific. Mm-hmm. And it's groupthink. And people want to be divisive too. You see it in fitness all the time. You've got CrossFitters, you've got powerlifters, you've got Olympic weightlifters, you've got bodybuilders, you've got strongmen, you've got, functional training, you've got all these different methods out there, and everyone thinks they're superior to everyone else.
So, what do you think the evidence-based community is doing wrong? Because, to your point, it's very easy to say, hey, the bros don't read studies, so they don't know. So, typically what happens, interestingly, is bodybuilders will get things right in practice, but they don't understand mechanisms, and they speak to mechanisms while being incorrect. And again, it's very easy to say that because, oh, hey, we're not doing that, so they're just doing that. So within the evidence-based community, what do you perceive as the most common?
3 things that I can think of offhand. Number 1, they might have their little laboratory, and they don't go out and dabble in, I remember the hit guys came onto my blog once when I did a podcast with Brad Schoenfeld about volume. Mm-hmm. And they started coming after me about, this study and this study and this study. So I just took a different approach. I said, so you guys, have you ever been on forums where people are talking about Shiko and Smolov, and some of these guys put 60 pounds on their squat, and it's just high volume. It's brutal, but so they're all doing it wrong. Now, a new paper by Jeremy Linecky that just came out, his group, also Scott Dinkel, I think, just came out today, talking about if you just want to get strong at 1RMs, just do a lot of 1RMs. You don't need to do all that volume. It's interesting. I kind of lean towards what he's saying, but anyway, they don't dabble in what you gotta, like me, I've amassed a lot of knowledge with strength and conditioning. 1/3 of that comes from lifting myself, training hard as hell for 25 straight years, consistently. 1/3 of that comes from training other people and all the knowledge I've gained from training so many different types of populations. And then the last 1/3 comes from reading research and science and sciencing, and conducting experiments and things like that. So the one thing they don't get out there and try what these people are doing. Try and experience it for yourself, and then you can better formulate hypotheses. Number 2, the way they write. It's so hard to understand. Sometimes I'll read an abstract or like a paper and I'm like, yeah, sometimes I see a graph and I'm like, what the hell? There's these 3D graphs that are hard for me to, especially when they're broken into 4 quadrants. I don't know. I'm like, I'll send it to Andrew and go, what the hell is this even saying?
Mm-hmm.
Who's gonna, if I'm having trouble with this and I'm a PhD, what is, so yeah, scientists write to other scientists. It's a circle jerk.
So are you thinking like just academic, like, or are you specifically thinking of people who might actually have some presence in the evidence-based?
No, that's just academics.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But, well, what's your goal? Is your goal to impress these other scientists?
Right.
Or is it to have your stuff? Because when I write my papers, I'm always like, how could I say this? So a lot of times when I blog, I'll say it in the easy way to explain it and understand, and then I'll put in parentheses, in biomechanics, this is known as blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So then they can learn, but it didn't intimidate them. And some of these papers are so hard to understand, it doesn't have to be that way. The abstract, that's what most people are going to see on PubMed. Why not make a good title and a good abstract that people can understand? And sometimes I read an abstract and I'm like, so what's the conclusion? What's the practical application? I don't even know it's like research don't think about it getting onto a forum with a bunch of meatheads trying to decipher what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And I thought of a third thing and now I forgot it. Sometimes they sit in this ivory tower and scoff at. You got to speak the other people's language. You got to learn to speak coach. When I go talk to, I'm a researcher, but when I go talk to coaches, I'm also a meathead. I'm a gym rat. I'm a lifter. And when I talk to a lot of my colleagues, you laugh. You think that I'd be like, I was analyzing the torque angle characteristics of this. No, it's like, dude, my quads are trash today or something. That's how I talk to them.
Your glutes are so pumped.
Yeah, glutes are so pumped right now. So yeah, it's just it's a respect thing. And if coaches respected scientists and scientists respected coaches, there'd be way better communication.
Mm-hmm. I'm seriously curious how much carryover Bret really believes barbell hip thrusts have for deadlifts and squats for powerlifters. Pete Rubish is an example of a guy who trained hip thrusts alongside his deadlifts and didn't see much, if any, carryover. Also, we see these guys who can hip thrust more than they can deadlift, and it makes me wonder if it's a worthwhile exercise for those individuals, aka powerlifters. Bret may be an example. Can he hip thrust quite a bit more than he can deadlift?
Okay, that's a good question. So, there's a couple moving parts to this question. Number one, he talked about Pete Rubish. Such a badass powerlifter. I think Pete Rubish used to love hip thrusts, and then he hit him hard for one training cycle and he didn't set PRs at his meet, so he concluded that they didn't help him. One thing I was hoping that back then Pete Rubish used to round more. So if you're a rounder and you get past your knees and you're rounded over, so think about it. You're right here. This is a hip thrust. It's glutes pushing forward. And I'm a round backer when I do a 1RM. So when I get past my knees, it's all glute strength. Now, interestingly, Pete's form has changed. It's improved over the last several years. And he's now pulling like 900 something pounds, but he doesn't round as much. And I think because he deadlifts a lot, but he also does, now his favorite assistance lifts for lower body are Bulgarian split squats, heavy barbell, and then also barbell back at 45-degree hypers, and he'll do like 400 or 500 pounds with those. It's crazy. However, I do think your hip thrusts need to be kind of posture specific if you want it to transfer. Meaning, if you're the arched back lifter and you get to the top, then your hip thrust, you should have your chest up a little bit. Now, I don't think that's the best way to work glutes, but I think it's the best way to transfer. If you're a round backer, keep your ribs down when you hip thrust, and then you get into some posterior pelvic tilt. Now, as to whether they transfer or not, well, what I said earlier, research reports averages, we've done the data. I can tell you during the twin study that I did, that this was the coolest thing because Ashley, the twin who did hip thrust, I never gave a squat in the warm-up or anything. And she'd never squatted before. They'd never squatted or hip thrusted before. And so Ashley, when I tested their 1RMs, but they were like athletic, they did like Pilates type workouts and stuff. So when I tested their 1RMs, they both got 95 pounds. But Ashley was like squirmy and her knees caved in, but she got to depth and hit 95 pounds. Then she hammered hip thrust for 6 straight weeks and she crushed hip thrust. It was a DUP training protocol. She started out with like 135 pounds, like one day was 4 sets of 10, one day was 5 sets of 6, and one day was 3 sets of 15. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It was brutal. And it was progressive overload. And the last set was always AMRAP, as many reps as possible. So if she had anything left in the tank, she kept going. And 2 minutes, strict 2 minute rest periods. And at the end of the 6 weeks, she has not done a single squat, not even a bodyweight squat. I test her again. This was so cool. It was right here. And I test her again, and she did a beautiful 135-pound squat. Knees didn't cave in, knees stayed out. Her form, wasn't all squirmy. Her form looked awesome. So just doing 6 weeks of hip thrust like crazy took her 1RM from 95 to 135, a 40-pound gain. I don't know what percentage that is, but anyway, yeah, it worked so well for her, a newbie. I can tell you with the training study we did with like, I don't know, I think there were like 30 adolescent male rugby players, probably like 15 in each group. I know that it improved front squat strength 50% as much as the front squat group. So yeah.
And they were not untrained.
No, they weren't. Yeah, they weren't untrained. And then there's another study. What's interestingly, there's a pilot study that is, it's actually a master's thesis, but I think it's going to get accepted. It only had like 8 subjects, but it shows that hip thrusts transfer better to squats than deadlifts do, and hip thrusts transfer better to deadlifts than squats do. So they're a great assistance lift, but they're an assistance lift. Specificity is so key when it comes to gaining strength. I can tell you other anecdotes, such as my client Sammy. She would take like, she weighed 123, she could squat 235 at her best and deadlift 315. She would take like 4 months off of lifting, except twice a week she'd do hip thrusts. She could hip thrust 315, but she'd just do 185 for like 4 sets. Mm-hmm. You know, and then she'd maintain all of her squat and deadlift strength. If I did that, I would lose so much strength. It's just a crazy phenomenon for some people. It works great, other people don't. Now here's what's important though. Remember in the beginning of this interview I said you need to know black and white thinking. First of all, I don't think it helps your deadlift strength off the floor that much. I think it helps your lockout. And this is evidence for that is shown with the we have the adolescent the training study that was published in JSCR, Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. We did an isometric mid-thigh pull, which is on a force plate and you're in this position here. Not quite a deadlift lockout, which would be here, but similar. And the hip thrust group gained 10% on that in the 6 weeks, and this front squat group only went up like less than 2%. So it transfers way better than that. And I will tell you, I trained at a powerlifting gym for about 2 years, and any of the deadlift, there's a guy there who weighs like 210 and pulls 765. I mean, he might get to 4 times body weight eventually. He's one of the top 30 powerlifters in the entire world in any federation in terms of his Wilks score. And but any of those guys who ever missed deadlifts at lockout, I would tell them hammer your hip thrusts and weighted back extensions to get that end range hip extension strength. Hammer those for about 6 weeks, and if they did it, they'd all say, "Oh my God, my lockout strength is crazy right now. It's never. In fact, it's not even a weakness now. I can lock out anything." But I'm sure it matters per individual, and here's where you have to be balanced. Andrei Malanichev is probably arguably the best, one of the best top 3 powerlifters in the world in the history of mankind. The dude squats like 1,100 pounds raw or something crazy like that. He does 3 lifts. He does squats, bench press, and deadlifts. Am I going to say, yeah, Malanichev, you should be doing hip thrusts? No. Imagine what it takes to squat 11. What do his warm-ups look like? He's probably squatting for an hour straight. I mean, he probably starts with body weight, then does 135, 225, 315, 405, 495, 585, 675, 765, 855, 945. Like, what do you go at a plate each time and keep doing a rep? I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like. And then it becomes so technique dependent because it's so heavy. You have to do everything right. You have to unrack it, back out, get everything right. But you don't base whether something works on the elite, the top 10 people in the world. You base it on the masses. And what I can tell you is hip thrusts are great for beginners. They're great for people who lack. What I hear from powerlifters and Olympic lifters and CrossFitters is it helps my deadlift lockout and it helps my hips feel better when I squat. When I squat, if people are prone to having hip pain, it helps their hips feel better. So I hear that all the time. So yeah, they're worth doing, but don't make them the emphasis, because if you're a powerlifter, you need to focus on the big three. And you could argue, an argument could be made that you'll see the best results over your career just doing the 3 competition lifts in the exact style that you do them in competition. But I can argue that point. In fact, if you're not argued, and I'm pure specificity and you're the variety guy, I could argue the best point for specificity, but I'm a variety guy. I like doing close grip bench. I like doing military press to increase my bench. I like doing posterior chain work. I like single leg work for building my squat. I like doing hip thrusts. I like doing back extensions. I like variety. Do I think it adds that much? No, probably 90% of your gains come from that specific lift. But 10% comes from assistance lifts. And a lot of people, West Side, Chico, they would say the same thing. But emerging research is showing that specificity is even more important than we once thought. But I can also tell you, as a personal trainer, I remember my girls I had like 7 or 8 girls I was training at the same time, and none of their bench presses had moved in like 2 months. I'm going, man, I haven't had any of the girls set a PR in 2 months. So I said, I'm taking bench press out and we're doing push-ups and incline press. Now, push-ups for males tends to be more endurance work, but for females to do them right, do them correct, where their elbows are tucked and they keep a neutral position, that's actually hard to do for a lot of women. They hammer their push-ups and incline press. Upon returning to bench press, so for 4 weeks they didn't do any bench, 2 of the 6 set immediate PRs, and then within the next month, all 8 of them in PR. They needed that break from specificity. So it just depends on the population, the experience, the gender, all these things, and your specific weakness, your anatomy, your physiology, all that stuff.
So how much variation, going in a different direction with this, but then I'll come back to the hip thrust and powerlifting question, how much variation is too much? Because I saw a discussion, I think it was last night, between Mike Israetel and another gentleman who, just a commentator essentially, saying that they disagree with switching out most exercises every 6 to 8 weeks. And their concern was initial adaptations are neurological, not muscle gain related. And this is in the context of programming for hypertrophy specific training. So their thought was, well, if you're switching out exercises every 6 to 8 weeks, let's say, then maybe even the majority of your adaptations will actually be neurological, and then you're going to switch out exercises again. So I'm realizing this is very far off of where you were. But
I love these debates. I love these questions. Because I agree with that. But that's not all you do. So it's like, in my programs, if it's an upper body day, you don't start off with any press, so whether it's bench press, close grip bench press, incline press, or military press. Then you might do a vertical pull, like a chin up or a lat pull down or something. Then you go do another press. If you did military, maybe you do a horizontal, like a close grip bench or a dumbbell or something. So you end up getting the volume in and you're always doing the same movement patterns, just with different, so it's not like my brain just got the neurological I mean, I've heard that debate, and I've had girls that train with me for the first month, their glutes I've had 2 girls put 2 inches on their glutes. in the first. Now, a lot of that could be edema, but their glutes never shrunk back. It's not like, oh, it's all cell swelling and then it shrinks back. Their glutes continue to grow after that.
Right.
So maybe the edema filled in with, I don't know, maybe it was permanent edema, I don't know, but this stuff that you see, and this is what I'm talking about. I have so much expertise as a personal trainer, as a lifter, and as a researcher. So I don't really buy that it's just pure neural. I think you can get hypertrophy sooner. It depends, but also the new stuff by Lineker shows that most strength gains are neurological. For strength, for hypertrophy, you have a different training method. But it's an interesting argument. I wouldn't agree with Mike there, but I see his point, and he's a very intelligent guy. But if the way I do my Strong by Bret programs, it's like every month. People like 4-week programs. It's cool to know that I'm going to bust my ass on this for 4 weeks, and then I'm going to try something different. No, we're always doing a type of squat, a type of deadlift, a type of hip thrust, a type of bench press, a type of, you were doing a couple presses, a couple pulls, and then sprinkle in some isolation movements. We change up the variation, we change up the rep ranges, we change up the exercise order, we change up the focus, but they're always getting stronger month after month after month, and their physiques are always getting better. But some people might look at that and go, if you're a powerlifter, you might look at that and go, why would you ever do hip thrust first? Or why would you ever? But this is hypertrophy training. But it does very well with, in fact, when I did my DUP plan with hip thrusts, all I did was one set of, I think I did 2 sets of squats per week and like 1 set of deadlifts per week. And during that month, I didn't lose any strength. In fact, because I was training squats in a fatigued state, after the month was over and I trained them first, I didn't go for a PR, but I think I could have hit a squat PR, which is interesting. You wouldn't think that would happen because I didn't train it with super heavy loading. So there's so many ways to make a good program, and it's so complicated. It might depend on the individual, but I do think you can vary things as long as it's the same movement patterns. It's not like you're going, this month we're doing a lot of bench pressing. Next month we're only doing flies and single joint pec movements, you know?
So it seems a common theme here is how much interindividual variation there is and how many different ways you can address the same goal. So a question that occurred to me is, how bad does something have to be for you to think that it's bad, as opposed to just good in a different context?
Like program design wise or what?
Right. Whether it's program design, exercise, because if you just say, well, context, it depends, it varies between people, how far can you take that before suddenly everything is all right?
Well, no, yeah, I don't think that way at all. I can't tell you how many. So my programs focus on glutes. I'm known as the glute guy.
Yes.
People come to me, they want glute results. I look at everyone else's programs and I'm like, oh my God, that won't build the glutes much. We do so much more than them for glutes. Like we're doing 35 sets a week.
Right. It's still super common to see squat, leg press, knee extension, leg curl.
Yep.
And like calf raise.
Yep. And and a lot of these women who have like a body part split and they're training, maybe they have a quad day and a ham day and they think glutes are covered in those. And I'm like, you have no idea. My girls are hip thrusting like crazy 3 times a week. And they're doing all sorts of lateral band work and they're hitting them from every angle and they're doing way more volume. And that's why my programs are successful. But some, Louis Simmons would look at my program and he doesn't know glute building like I do, but he knows powerlifting like I do. He'd go, that's not going to maximize the squat. You need to train the squat 2 days a week. And then another person, like my buddy Eric Helms would go, you need more frequency than that. You need more volume, He trained his bench 5 days a week, and his bench shot up 50 pounds. Menno is into high frequency training. He'd say train every day. So there's so many ways to make it work, but there's common elements that need to be there. Because I can't tell you how many times I look at someone's program and I go, that's not going to build their glutes, or when you have people doing plyometrics, but it's really like just jump conditioning, and I'm like, that's gonna hurt. They're probably gonna hurt themselves, they probably can't even do it. So but there's a lot that's wrong, that's bad, that's not optimal.
Sure.
And a lot of things, it's like, yeah, it's a good workout, but it's not optimal per that person's goals.
So what are the common elements that you would see in a good program, even if this person has these goals and this is a good program for them, and this person has radically different goals, their program is good, but what would both of those have? Like, what elements of those would they have in common?
You know, years ago I wrote 2 T-Nation articles. One was the new, God. It was like, what things are not necessary? What are the non-rules of, like, not rules of training? And then these are the 8 rules, and I wish I had that in front of me because I spent a lot of time thinking about it. You need to be performing, I wouldn't even say compound lifts, but I kind of think compound, like you need to be doing compound and isolation movements that work well with your body. You know, not everyone has to squat, not everyone has to deadlift, not everyone has to hip thrust, but you should be doing something of that pattern. Most people can box squat or RDL or, you know, do band hip thrusts or something, or glute bridges or something, high rep, dumbbell glute bridges. You can do that pattern, but it's got to jive well with your body, with your anatomy and physiology, and it's got to work well, and then get stronger at those over time. But then you could say you don't even need to get stronger because you could just contract harder with the same loads, which is another topic.
Come back to this.
So yeah, the more I learn, the more I realize it's hard to define these rules. You need to be overloading the muscle by providing a continued stimulus for it to grow. And you can do that in the traditional way is progressive overload. Put more weight on the bar. That doesn't always mean more muscle force though. I can hip thrust 800 pounds, but my chest pops up. I feel it more in my hammies when I did 800 pounds because my form erodes a little bit. But I could do 700 strict and feel it more. But it's like that 800 pounds is for my ego, for showing off on Instagram, you know?
Right.
And hell, today I took 225 and just did hip thrusts with a controlled cadence and did, high rep sets, and I felt it a ton. So you don't have to go heavy. You have to just pick movements and get stronger at them. And how you get stronger at them is there's a lot of ways to do that in terms of frequency and volume and how you manipulate that. Right now I lean towards higher frequency, less volume per session, but I'm not prepared to say every bodybuilder out there, you're all doing it wrong. You're all stupid. You should all be doing it the way I'm doing it, because they're the most jacked people in the world. But my glute training methods are better than theirs because I have the best before and after pictures in the world for my clients. So my glute training methods are superior, and it's higher volume, higher frequency. But can you do that for every muscle group? No, you can't. You can't do what I do for glutes and also do that same thing for the delts, the bis, the tris, the pecs, the lats, the abs, the quads, the hamstrings, the calves. It would be too much. So you have to specialize.
Right.
If that's your goal, is to have nice glutes. And then there's the genetic aspect to it, and then there's the different goals, if it's strength, function, or hypertrophy.
So you've twice said, you've talked about the pro bodybuilder, the people with the best physiques in the world, and you wouldn't want to say to them you're doing it wrong. Could they be doing it wrong in the sense that what they're doing is obviously very highly effective, but maybe they're leaving 3% gains on the table by not, say, training with higher frequency?
Well, Brad Schoenfeld and James Krieger's Dan Osborne was in that, I think, too. Their recent meta-analysis shows that 2 days a week is better than 1 day a week. And then 3 days a week might be, they need more research on that. There weren't enough studies. But yeah, I think they should be hitting the muscle. I mean, Ronnie Coleman would hit the muscles twice a week back in the day.
Yeah, like what would he know?
His training was brutal.
It's funny to me that hitting everything once a week is still overwhelmingly regarded as the thing,
the gold standard, right?
When there are so many examples, like Ronnie trained things with higher frequency. His split was a little bit weird, if I recall correctly, but it was higher frequency. And similarly, I've read so many articles of, at one point, Phil Heath was training his legs twice a week. He was training his back twice a week. when Jay was trying to catch up with Ronnie, he was training his back twice a week. So this isn't even a novel idea within the...
And when they have a weak part that they're trying to bring up, they increase the frequency usually. So, but it's hard to do that with everything, so you have to specialize. So I do think that's a good strategy if you say, like, look at my physique, and this is good, this is good, this is good, here is terrible, I need to bring up my quads. Okay, do everything once a week and hit quads 3 times a week or something. But yeah, in general, to build the best package overall, I think body part split can work well, but like you don't just have one leg day, and that's the only, split it into quads and hams, and maybe glutes. Like you could do 3 leg days, glute day, a quad day, and a ham day.
I thought you were going to say, if you have quad day and ham day, well, you can hit
Glutes on both day. So you could do that, like, so like the quad day could be like squats, lunges, leg press, and then the ham day could be deadlifts, hip thrusts, back extensions, you know, and then like throwing leg extensions on the quad day, leg curls, and then maybe like seated hip abductions on the ham day, even though it's glutes. But don't just train glute legs 1 day a week, you know, and also, you know, delts get hit. Whenever you do your pecs, your front delts get hit, your rear delts get hit a lot in back days, so just train shoulders 1 day a week, but make sure you have, like if you have a chest day, a back day, and an arm day, on your arm day, maybe you could do like close grip bench, and maybe you could do chin-ups on that day so you get some rework on your pecs and lats. But again, there's so much that goes into that.
Do you feel like that's, because I've heard similar recommendations, you know, you could do chest work on an arm day or put chest and shoulders together, etc. Do you feel that's an attempt to salvage a bad training concept? Like, as opposed to, because look, I'm speaking about this from experience. I did bro splits for years and years, and I tried to condense them more, and then finally, around this time last year, I was like, wow, this is really, I'm clearly trying to fit the square peg in the round. Like, this isn't working. So I threw it out completely, and I actually went immediately to daily full bodies because, hey, I might as well just go all in. And I don't regret it at all. It was a great learning experience. Ultimately, I wasn't able to sustain that, but again, I had the epiphany of this. I just perceived this as a fundamentally bad concept, so I'm just going to throw it out and start from scratch.
Well, that's a good, so again, what I think a good evidence-based professional should be able to do is argue both sides. Mm-hmm. You know, a good learning strategy would be for me to say, Ian, you and I are going to argue right now. You're going to defend body part splits, and I'm going to defend full body, mm-hmm. and we'll argue, and then we'll switch. Right. And then you'll argue full body. And I could argue, like, if you just did 1 day per one body part per day, trained everything once up. You know what's ideal about that? Think of on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being your leg day. 10 is brutal. What's your chest day? A 6? Mm-hmm. Back day might be a 7 or 8. Shoulder day, that's like a 5 or a 4. Arm day, you have these natural fluctuations so that when it's leg day, you're amped. If you try to do too much on all your days, you don't get the psychological arousal that's necessary to hit PRs. You're just dragging. So again, I could argue so many different, there's so much to this. It's so much more complicated than people think. But anyway, that's what makes this so fun and fascinating.
That's a really interesting point because I've not been doing daily full bodies recently, but I've been doing 6 times per week, lower, upper, and typically training on the, I know how last time we were here, you said you need the day of rest. I'm like, yeah, no thanks. Like, psychologically, I can't do it, but repeatedly, I would really smash it Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday would be iffy, and then I would just be like done. So something I did is I moved forward my easiest workouts. So now Monday and Tuesday are my hardest workouts. I say heavy, but I train, hypertrophy ranges.
The most effort.
Right. And then like today's workout and then tomorrow's, I deliberately hold back. Like I go in and do what I know will, elevate the ceiling for maximum muscle protein, balance acutely.
Yep.
And then, so I'll do that today, tomorrow. So I got the workouts in, but then I'm really fresh for the tail end of the training week. And it's interesting that you brought that up in the context of bro splits, and I agree with that being true there, and I've taken that and applied that to high frequency training.
Yep. I mean, me and my buddy Ben Bruno, I'm wearing his shirt, we would always talk, like, we like training Monday through Friday and having the weekend off, Saturday and Sunday. But by Friday, we'd both be trashed. We'd be functionally overreached.
Right.
But then you take Saturday and Sunday off. Monday, you're like, oh, I feel great again. And you repeat the process. So, yep, are you recovering? Are you setting PRs? Are you going up in things? Or, then your program's working for you. If you're not, then you need to change something around.
We have left the best question for last, which is, and this comes from Simon Otero, who to my knowledge owns a powerlifting gym and is a powerlifter himself. Ask him what he thinks about your weightless curls, please. So
that name rings a bell. I've heard of it.
Masthetics, I think is his brand.
Yeah. So good question, Simon. I wrote a blog about this, the no load.
Mm-hmm.
So this is another study coming out of Jeremy Lenecke's group. We've now talked about 3 studies that he was involved in. This study was fascinating. I think the title of my blog post was, "Do we even need to lift? And do we need gyms? Can you just get the same muscle growth out of just flexing and posing?" But this wasn't posing, just flexing the arms. This involved moving through flexion and extension. And so this was a classic study because the reason why I like this is because I remember thinking about this. When I read all the bodybuilding magazines, the bodybuilders would say, you bring up your conditioning, your detail in the last, when you start posing in preparation for a contest. I remember reading a couple different bodybuilders who said they bring about more detail. Well, what does that mean? Detail means hypertrophy, like your muscles are growing while you're leaning out. And I thought that's an interesting thing because when I was 15 years old, I couldn't activate. I remember going, I don't know how to activate my lats. So I'd sit there in the mirror and I would flex in the mirror for like 10 minutes, and it helped. I remember I could squeeze my biceps so hard, and then I'd do a curl, and I could recreate that sensation. And the bodybuilders called it mind muscle connection, and now it's funny. Some of the powerlifters hate that term. I remember this one powerlifter wrote, like, "I'm sorry, Bret, he tagged me on Facebook, but I just hate this term, mind muscle connection." All these people just start ripping on it. I'm like, I've studied it. It's a thing. It's a legitimate thing. But I do think that it helps you with your weight training when you pose a lot. But now I'm going off on a tangent. This study just looked at, they had each person served as their own control because one arm used a dumbbell, the other arm no load. So what they did was, for 6 weeks, they had the one arm did 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps with around 70% of 1RM, and they would adjust it each week to where they went up. I don't know if it was 3 times a week. Yeah, it was 3 times a week because it was 18 total sessions. So they did 18 total sessions over 6 weeks with 4 sets with either dumbbell, progressive overload, or 4 sets of no load, but they did 4 sets of 20 just coming up and down. And so what provides the resistance for the biceps? It's the triceps co-contracting and pulling the other way, so the biceps have to counteract that. And they did 4 sets of 20 with 30 seconds rest in between sets. And the dumbbell group had 90 seconds rest. So the dumbbell group, 4 sets of 8 to 12 with 90 seconds rest. This group did 4 sets of 20 with 30 seconds rest. Now, I want anyone out there to try the 4 sets of 20 with 30 seconds rest. It's squeezing as hard as you can. They didn't just look at strength, they looked at EMG, they looked at strength, they looked at muscle thickness, hypertrophy, and they looked at, I think they looked at cell swelling as well. Or anyway, it was similar, like metabolic stress for both groups. I think the no-load group had more. But yeah, you get a pump, you feel the burn. It's a legit training protocol, but it's boring as hell. 4 sets of flexing. What the researchers did say is that you wouldn't get a high activation down low. It was mostly in the flex contracted position. And I was actually a peer reviewer for this study. and I accepted it. One of the things I recommended to them was that they show an EMG trace to show throughout the range of motion what the dumbbell looked like versus what because I would think that the dumbbell would start out higher and the no load would be lower and then peak later on here. But bottom line is they had similar gains in muscle thickness. So my buddy Brad is like, what? So you think, he said this to me, Bret, so you think you could maintain your muscle mass not even lifting weights, just flexing? I'm like, I actually do, but there's one caveat. My workouts in the gym right now last like an hour and a half. You know, sometimes I'm in here for 2 hours. If I spent 2 hours flexing and like did it just like say I did just lower body flexing for 2 hours off and on, yeah, I think I would. Plus, like, do you need to go through the range of motion or can you just flex? So that's another study that Brad and I are doing because we all got in an argument about it.
Right.
And so we're going to do a study.
So it's not unloaded training, it's actual
posing. So one group, but both groups are going to do the same resistance training and one group's going to pose. Is the posing additive? Does it give you more muscle mass? I think it does. I think Brad thinks it will not.
Would it be enough? Would it be enough to discern in the time frame?
I think so. I don't know what we're going to do, 12 weeks or 8 weeks or 6 weeks, but I think it will. But we'll see. I'm open to changing my mind. But anyway, I think that it is additive. Brad thinks that you don't need, he's like, why would you need to go through the range of motion? I don't know, because it's not like you're not activating down low, you're not getting muscle damage, you're not getting stretch. It's mostly just but maybe something about the unload, like relax, contract is better than just holding it for like 20, you know. So I mean, think about it, the 4 sets of 20, so if you did 4 sets of 20 with 90 seconds rest, I can't remember the cadence, but it's a hard workout. If you just sat there squeezing as hard as you can, would you get the same growth out of it? I don't know. We don't know the answer to that. But bottom line is, I think that, hell, no one's going to injure, you're never going to injure yourself flexing.
Well, be careful. You know how it is.
Yeah, but it's a viable training method. I don't think you should just abandon all the weights. I just think that some days I'll do really light loads and just squeeze the muscle as hard as I can. And I've done the EMG studies. You can do like body weight hip thrusts and just squeeze your glutes as hard as you can while you do it. And you can get EMG readings almost as high as when you're doing a 1RM. It's crazy. So yeah, I think it can build muscle. I think it works through different pathways possibly. Now like Stu Phillips thinks that muscle growth is mostly about recruiting motor units. Brad Schoenfeld's model is like, you got muscle damage, you got mechanical tension, you got metabolic stress. So this would be high activation, so recruiting a lot of motor units, creating a lot of tension, high metabolic stress, but not any muscle damage. Here's what's interesting to think about. Muscle damaging protocols are kind of notorious for activating a lot of satellites, causing a lot of satellite cell activation, which ends up donating their nuclei into the muscle cells. So now you have more manufacturers, more factories, you know, carrying out genetic things that are needed to carry out muscle growth. Mm-hmm. So that could be a long-term effect of training for damaging exercise, that it doesn't increase muscle protein synthesis right away, but it has a long-term effect of increasing the myonuclei. But interestingly, the people who, like Greg Knuckles and Jose Antonio, have both cited that as a reason why you want to do high damaging exercise. Mm-hmm. But there's a blood flow restriction study where the author said this is the highest satellite cell activity we've ever seen.
And it yielded lower hypertrophy. Was this the study where they just did blood flow restriction, but they did it after the...
No, okay. This was like in 2012 paper. Okay. But it showed that their satellite cell count activation was through the roof. And I don't know if they looked at myonuclear addition, but anyway, that's another way. So maybe so that's where I wonder about Stu Phillips' model about just recruiting motor units. Does working the muscle in a stretch and focusing on the eccentric does that have additive effects for down the road? Does getting a pump, feeling the burn, does that have differential effects down the road, or do you just need to ignore that and just achieve high levels of motor unit recruitment? And then even with that, I can get a lot of motor unit recruitment and then just do the same workout every time and never go up.
Sure.
You know, if you're doing body weight, are you progressive? Are you doing overload? Are you building muscle and then creating more force over time? I don't know the answer to that. It's fascinating to me. I want to say just off my traditional thinking, no, you need weights. Because weights help you get a better muscle contract. They help you create more damage. They help you achieve more metabolic stress. They help you achieve higher levels of tension. But maybe it's just about, Stu Phillips is more accurate about just achieving high levels of motor unit activation, and you can continue to grow. We will know so much more 5 years from now than we know now. So right now we're in this kind of interesting phase we need to know more about, but I can tell you, no-load curls are legit.
Excellent, perfect. So I'm going to replace all of my very light resistance training with completely unloaded resistance training. But one serious question though.
Well, real quick, before you answer, it might depend on the muscle too, because what are you going to do for lats? This is everyone can squeeze.
Right.
Even beginner women who have never done curls, they'll be like, feel, like they can get a good, they're proud of their biceps. That's an easy muscle to contract. Same with quads. But think of lats. What would you do if you did no load lat contractions? What would you do?
I will figure out a way.
What would you do for delts? Unloaded lateral raises? Can you get as high of activation as you? So it might be muscle specific, and we need a lot more research before we can make the claim that you don't need weights anymore. I think what we'll find is yes, you do need weights, but this is what I think the research is important for times of injury, times when you're on vacation, times when you're bored at home and you want to do something extra. Squeeze the glutes, squeeze the muscles.
Right. I sense that you do this in your free time.
I used to. When you get on the Bret Contreras bandwagon, you'll find yourself squeezing your glutes. You'll be in the kitchen.
I do that. People at the gym tell me, they're like, what are you doing with your butt? I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, you're just moving. And I figured it out. I'm literally just contracting my glutes.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that goes away in time. You'll get over that phase. Yeah.
Excellent. These different models of hypertrophy, are they really mutually exclusive? Or could it be motor unit recruitment is very important, but if that's the same, greater volume still yields greater hypertrophy? And similarly, could it be greater muscle damage is superior, all else being equal, but it's also true that additional volume is beneficial, etc.? Or is it really, this is the correct model, and this is wrong, but we don't know that yet?
That's a good point, because you can have what if I just went, and then done. Yeah, I got high levels of motor recruitment for 1 second. Mm-hmm. There's a time component. You need a time under tension or something. The time component to how long it's motor recruitment times time. Maybe it's think of area under the curve if there's a graph.
Right.
That's there's a time component. But volume might be inverted U-shaped curve where it goes up and then plateaus and then eventually. When people are the more you squat, the better. I'm like, okay, should I quit my job and just squat should I set my alarm and squat at midnight and then you're not sleeping at all? Should I set my alarm 3 times? Should I squat 6 times a day? Obviously there's a threshold where you can't recover. So what's the optimal, and there's probably a genetic component to it. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think the future of a lot of this stuff and answers in fitness are nutrigenomics, resistance training genomics, all this stuff eventually, probably not in our immediate future, but maybe 20, 30 years from now, you'll be able to go in and get a test done and they can say, okay, this is the way you should eat, this is the way you should train, this is what, just do this, and then you'll maximize your hypertrophy and body composition.
Right, and this could potentially vindicate my style of training that's ridiculed online. Perfect. With regard to the volume example though, is that an issue of fatigue, or do you think how plausible do you think it is that mechanistically you reach a point where additional workload yields decreased hypertrophy? So not thinking whole body, a human being, they have to sleep, at some point their knees are going to explode if they're squatting for 12 hours a day or whatever it might be, but literally at the level of the muscle, it's going to become bigger to a decreased degree because of more training.
That's a good point, because I almost think that the muscle can handle a lot more as long as you don't strain it. And also, pain and discomfort inhibits activation. Right now I have this annoying thing in my knee, and every time I squat, it's there. When I don't have that, the days that my knee feels great, I'm uninhibited, I'm unencumbered, and I can get a better workout. So a lot of this is our nervous system modulating how hard you can contract based on inputs, maybe nociceptors or basically mechanoreceptors and different things that are sensing things. And a lot of it is like your joints can only handle so much squatting. Your hip joints and your knee joints, you can't do 100 sets of squats a week with heavy load and sufficient effort. There's a sweet spot, and so a lot of it is what your joints, what your soft tissue can handle, and that has to do with anatomy too, because if you've got, low hip flexion mobility and you're trying to deep squat, your bone, femur is going to hit up against your anterior labrum, and you're going to have impingement, you're going to have damage to that structure, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to affect you the next time you try to squat. So that's why I think doing things like your no-load curls come into play, because you do your squats, you do your deadlifts, but you can't those are they're the most effective exercise, but they're the most dangerous, and you can get so much more extra penalty-free volume in from doing those other things.
Right. Yeah, that's what I found over the past 8 weeks or so of daily arm training is the more traditional, heavier, like sets of 10 to 12, direct triceps, biceps isolation. I can do that about 3 times a week, but more than that, and I really sense like my elbows are hurting, well then I go to try to press and my elbows are hurting, preventing me from even... Whereas, so what I do now is I do that on my upper days, then on my lower days, everything is like 20 or more reps. And so am I able to say, yes, I'm confident with the kind of confidence I would have if an actual study were done on this, that's having a benefit? No, but if I had to, in the scenario of the holding the gun to your head for 3 months or whatever it was, I would bet that is making a difference.
If you're wearing a suicide vest and the person's watching you, ready to push the button.
Yeah.
But what you brought up real quick was interesting. We tend to be very linear in our programming, like we have a 7-day calendar. Mm-hmm. Most of our, I deadlift every 9 days. You don't do that. I don't do that because I like it being on a schedule. I like my weekends. I like doing my hardest workout on Mondays. We also like to be consistent. But think of all the most popular programs, like starting strength. They do 5 sets of 5 of squats and bench in 1 set of 5 of deadlifts. Almost all the popular powerlifting programs ever written have less deadlift. Westsiders, they avoid the deadlift. They like box squats and good mornings. They don't avoid the deadlift altogether. They just do a lot of dynamic effort deadlifts and not as much heavy one-arm grinding because it's the most taxing lift. But there are different frequencies and volume per lift. So it's like, what's the best volume for you for your bench press? The most you can handle without getting discomfort and running yourself into the ground. What's the best squatting programming for you? Well, do it as much as you can without getting any pain and discomfort anywhere, because then you get inhibition, and if you keep going with that, you get tendinopathy, you can get a lot of things that it's like take 2 steps forward, take 2 steps back. And that's a problem with so many lifters. It takes years to listen to your body. It took me like 20 years of lifting to listen to my body properly. And hindsight's always 20/20. You get injured, you can go, my body was telling me, I was so stupid, I pushed through and ignored the signals. But different lifts might have different optimal frequency per individual. Maybe you can bench press 3 times a week, maybe you can squat twice a week, and maybe you can deadlift twice a week if you do 1 heavy and 1 light session. This guy might be able to bench 5 times a week and be fine. If his anatomy distributes the stress well, and his technique, and maybe he can bench 5 days a week and you can only do 3.
Right.
I wish I could squat 5 days a week. I can't. I've tried.
Yeah.
I do better when I squat 2 to 3 days a week, usually 2 lately, and I wish I could, I wish I could deadlift 5 days a week. I can't even come close. I can deadlift heavy 1 day a week and a lighter day. I've found that out through years of experimentation, but everyone's unique. So it's up to us to find our optimal programming, which changes every few years. You're in a different, you have a different history now. You have different injuries, now you're stronger, you might have different, so now you have to always be willing to change on the fly according to what your body's telling you. And I used to deadlift heavy twice a week, now I can only do heavy once a week.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I used to only think I thought I could only bench twice a week, but my buddy Eric was like, I've been benching 5 days a week, so now I bench 3 times a week and I can handle it. So.
Yeah, I remember my family moved from Europe to Atlanta in 2009, and I vividly remember that summer I was basically doing Jay Cutler's training, and I could, go in and do like 20 sets of back in like an hour, and that was fine. And I really don't think I could do that now, and I'm curious, I wonder did I just train harder? Did I not really know how to activate my back muscle? So maybe those sets were largely kind of throwaway sets. But yeah, it's what's very clear is what you've said is it's just different. In terms of what my body responds to, what I'm able to do, it's very different to what I did then. And then for all I know, if back then I had tried high frequency training, maybe I wouldn't have been able to do it. And then another interesting example is I could probably figure out a way to squat and admittedly I train really aiming for hypertrophy and much lighter, but I could probably figure out a way to squat every day comfortably. Indeed, typically when I squat more often, it feels better because I'm more used to it. Whereas literally a dumbbell overhead extension, it's so uniquely harsh on my elbows that more than 3 days a week, I'm like, this is really unwise. And that's a single joint, well, it's shoulders probably involved, but supposedly a single joint movement.
Well, a lot of the single joint exercises wreak havoc on the elbow joint. When you just do mostly compound, you don't get elbow issues.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start doing all the different tricep extensions and curls and pullovers and flies, and lateral raises even. Mm-hmm. I've even noticed with heavy laterals I can get some irritation. A couple things of what you just said. You could squat every day, but even if you're going for hypertrophy, you're going to be inching up the weight. Maybe right now you do 135 for a set of 20,
sure.
But if you did that, if you squatted every day for a year, you'd be doing 225 for 20. Maybe in 3 years you're doing 315 for 20. There'll be a point where it's too much for you. You need to reduce the frequency. Mm-hmm. But other people say, no, you got to always increase volume. But you can do the same amount of sets, but as you get stronger, then you're doing more volume. So there's different ways of looking at it. That's why I think, load and load is because you can't just do singles and maximize hypertrophy. But right. If you're getting stronger after you're doing between, say 10 sets a week for the muscles and getting stronger, you're going to be okay. You're going to be sitting pretty. But, and then, what was the other thing you said? I forgot.
Well, yeah, being able to do many more sets for a given body part, again, in these fairly short workouts in the past. And because of how long it's been, and plus just the fact I can't go back and do that over again to verify what the experience was. So it's really, what I hear you saying, and this has been my experience as well, is it's a continuous adjustment to what, for example, since coming to Phoenix, my work capacity is massively increased. And I'm like, it's gotta be psychological. It has gotta be psychological. Because I'm actually eating less. I have access to good gyms. And, so on some level, I don't really know what it is, but the adjustment is, okay, so I'm going to roll with this. Like, why would I not? And so, I agree.
Yep, I agree. And if you pay attention, because there's experience, like you can think of people at their work, where if they just clock in and clock out, they do the same job every day for 30 years and never learn anything because they're not, same thing with lifting. If you pay close attention and make adjustments, then you're going to be so much more knowledgeable and effective over the years. But if you just go in and like a robot and just follow orders and this is my sets and reps for this percentage of 1RM, and you don't ever question anything and you don't experiment, then you won't learn all you need to know. You got to try out all the different exercises. You got to do different configurations of all the different variables and figure out, like a plant, but we're much more complicated than a plant. And then you figure out this is the configuration that works for me now. In 5 years, it's going to be markedly different. Although I could say, in general, do 3 full body workouts per week, do 4 exercises for 3 to 4 sets, heavy compound lifts, and maybe add in an isolation lift, and do that for the rest of your life, you'd probably be fine too. So
Excellent.
Question everything and be open-minded, but be skeptical and scrutinize and know that, hell, 10 years ago I know so much more than I know now. And 10 years from now I could watch this interview and go, man, I was an idiot.
Just don't watch it. That's the secret. I think that's a great place to end it. Thanks so much, Bret.
Thank you.